In the Edo period, there was no modern infrastructure, no electricity, no gas, no running water, and there were no supermarkets packed with everyday goods. Because the living environment was so different from ours, it can be hard to picture what ordinary people's daily life looked like. Some assume it must have been nothing but inconvenience, but Edo also developed an astonishingly rich ecosystem of prepared food, street vendors, and neighborhood services. If you had a few coins, you usually didn't struggle to find a meal, and even after sunset, there were close, familiar forms of entertainment that made the city feel alive. In this script, we're going to walk through a full day, from dawn to bedtime, following the routine of a typical three-person household living in a back alley nagaya, row house tenements where many craftsmen, peddlers, and working families lived. We'll move through the day in order, using approximate times and the habits that shaped Edo life. By the end, you'll see a world that could be harsh, yet also surprisingly practical, social, and inventive. To understand an Edo morning, you first need to understand how the city itself was organized. Where you lived was tied to social status. Broadly speaking, Edo was divided into areas for samurai residences, areas dominated by temples and shrines, and the townspeople districts where merchants and artisans lived. The exact proportions shifted over time, but a common way to describe it is that samurai lands took up roughly 70% of the city, while temple lands and townspeople lands each made up something like 15%. The townspeople districts housed huge numbers of residents, hundreds of thousands, concentrated in places such as Nihonbashi, Fukagawa, and along major routes. Those townspeople neighborhoods weren't thrown together at random. The shogunate planned the urban layout with intention, taking inspiration from older city patterns such as Kyoto's street divisions. A grid-like logic helped shape blocks, roads, and entrances. A basic unit was a square block measured in ken, a traditional unit of length. Picture a square a little over 100 meters on each side. Along the roads, residential strips were created with a certain depth, and two facing strips, separated by a main street, formed a recognizable community unit. These two-sided streets were combined in different widths to build the dense cityscape of Edo. At the entrances to these neighborhoods, security mattered. Many areas had a wooden gate marking the boundary of the town section. Next to the gate, there was typically a small watch post that served multiple purposes, guarding the gate, handling local duties, and also functioning as a point of coordination in emergencies such as fires. A common rule was to close the gate around 10 at night and open it around 6 in the morning. After closing, passage was restricted. Not everyone could come and go freely. Special cases like doctors were prioritized. Along the main street, you'd find front-facing nagaya with small shops, fish sellers, vegetable shops, pottery sellers, and other essentials. Many opened around 6 in the morning. Deeper inside the alleys, away from the main road, were back nagaya and storehouses. The nagaya themselves were collective housing, a long building divided into multiple rooms, sometimes several, sometimes more than 10. Each room might be 6 to 8 tatami in size, yet entire families lived there. Many different jobs appeared in these spaces. Craftsmen such as carpenters, street peddlers, day laborers, and other working people. Shared facilities were crucial: a communal well, latrine, garbage area, and drying space. Life in the alley was close and constant. Privacy was thin, but community was unavoidable. So when did the day begin? Many people started at a time known as akemutsu, roughly half an hour before sunrise. It changed with the seasons, but translated into modern clock time, it often falls around 6 in the morning. Signals and bells rang out across the city, neighborhood gates opened, and Edo began to move as if the entire city had been nudged awake at once. In a back nagaya, the first to rise was often the woman managing the household. In many homes, she set the rhythm. Her first job was breakfast, which meant lighting the fire at the cooking area used by the household or shared by the row. Then she went to the communal well, drew water, and carried it back to storage jars. There were no taps and no pipes. Water came from labor. That same water was used to wash rice, cook, clean, and live. While the rice steamed, she washed her face, arranged her hair, and cleaned her teeth using tools common in the period. One was a kind of fiber-tipped twig, made by pounding and fraying the end of a small branch so it acted like a brush. Edo also saw the rise of tooth powders sold in shops. Some were so popular, they became part of city fashion. A cleaner mouth and whiter teeth were desirable, and there were many different formulas available, which hints at how much appearance and personal grooming mattered even among ordinary people. Once breakfast was ready, the family, wife, husband and child ate together. A simple pattern was common: rice as the base, one soup, often miso, and one side dish. Side dishes tended to be affordable and practical: natto, dried shredded daikon, simmered vegetables, seasoned seaweed, or small fish. Edo even had rankings and buzz around popular side dishes, and people talked about simple soups with tofu and modest fish as everyday favorites. Another key difference from modern life is how meals were served. It wasn't always a single shared table. Often each person had their own tray and ate their own portion. After the meal, water was conserved. Rather than washing everything immediately, a typical habit was to pour hot water into the rice bowl and loosen the stuck grains while eating pickles, leaving the bowl cleaner without using much water. It reduced waste and saved effort. Then food and supplies were stored. The rice cooked in the morning was kept for lunch and dinner, often in containers designed to preserve it. Around 7 to 7:30, men who worked outside left the house. The nagaya housed many trades: craftsmen, peddlers carrying goods on poles, and day workers who went out to find jobs. Each left according to their work rhythm. Then children who attended terakoya, private neighborhood schools, left as well. Education wasn't compulsory, so starting ages varied, but beginning around 6 or 7 was common. Lessons focused on reading, writing, and abacus, using instructional texts known as oraimono. Because mixed ages studied in one room, teaching wasn't a single unified lecture the way modern classrooms work. It was more individualized. Each child worked on their assignment while the teacher corrected and guided. Classes often began around 8 and continued until around 2. There was no school lunch system, so many children went home at midday to eat, then returned if their schedule required. With husband and child out, the woman's domestic workload continued. Laundry came first. Near the well, she filled a tub and washed clothing by hand, rubbing and sometimes stepping gently to work the fabric. There were no modern washboards or soap, so substitutes were used: ash, or the starchy water left from rinsing rice. The main garment was the kimono, and washing depended on its construction. A simple unlined kimono could be washed as a whole, but lined or padded garments were often taken apart at the seams, washed as fabric pieces, and sewn back together. After washing, the cloth was carefully stretched and dried, sometimes pasted onto boards, so it would dry straight without warping. In narrow alleyways with limited sunlight, people used communal drying areas, and because several women worked in the same place, the well and drying space became social hubs. Neighborhood talk, rumors, laughter, and sometimes tension. Community life grew out of necessity. After laundry, sewing was essential. Sewing in Edo wasn't a pastime. it was survival skill. Clothing was valuable, so people patched and reinforced fabric again and again. Sleeves and hems were repaired repeatedly. Because of this, sewing was taught from childhood, and sewing tools mattered so much they were often part of a bride's marriage goods. It wasn't luxury, it was everyday maintenance. Once core chores were done, she went shopping. Edo had traveling vendors, so many items could be bought without going far, but for multiple purchases, small storefronts along the main road were common. These shops were narrow, just a few meters wide, with a wooden platform displaying goods. The range could be impressive. Rice, fish, vegetables, condiments, charcoal, firewood, and everyday objects, including second-hand items. Edo's commercial density was enormous. Historical records even list types of shops and their numbers. In major surveys from the 19th century, the total count of stores was in the tens of thousands, and two categories stood out as overwhelmingly common. One was rice-related shops, because polishing rice by hand was heavy labor, and many people preferred to buy it already prepared. Another was fuel sellers, charcoal and firewood, because cooking and heating water depended on fuel every single day. This tells you something basic and powerful. Even without modern utilities, Edo had a vast economy built around the simple reality of fire. That is the typical morning rhythm of a nagaya household. The husband earns outside, the child studies, and the wife sustains the home through labor that often goes unseen but never stops. Then noon arrives. Lunch was usually around midday and resembled breakfast. If the husband and child were nearby, they ate at home. Morning rice, soup, pickles, and one side dish. But for men working farther away, lunch often came from outside. Edo had a developed fast food culture, soba stands, one-plate rice shops, and places serving something hot quickly. Sushi, tempura, grilled squid, and other street foods existed in forms recognizable today. Prices were relatively manageable for working people, and in a city with many single men, or men living away from family, eating out was normal. Edo also offered cheap sweets, so people often grabbed dumplings or small confections between tasks to keep going. After lunch, work resumed until late afternoon. But how much did ordinary people actually earn? One common example comes from vegetable peddlers, a typical Edo occupation. Records from the early 19th century describe the household budget of a seller with a wife and two children. He rose at dawn, carried his pole, bought produce at the market, and walked the streets selling until evening. His daily investment could be several hundred mano. If business went well and he sold out, his gross sales might reach close to double what he spent. But that wasn't pure profit. From it, he had to set aside money for the next day's stock, pay portions of rent, cover rice, miso, soy sauce, and other necessities, and sometimes repay debts. After all expenses, the actual take-home profit was modest, enough to keep the family fed, occasionally enjoy a drink on good days, but not enough to build large savings easily. And when weather turned bad, sales dropped. That's why saving, even a little, mattered. Around 2 in the afternoon, children returned from terakoya, and that time had a familiar tradition. Oyatsu, the afternoon snack. Typical oyatsu included cheap sweets, sometimes fruit, and small confections made from brown sugar and syrup mixed with affordable ingredients. Many of these snacks were simple, popular, and sold for very little. It's often said the name oyatsu became linked to the time because it was eaten around the 8th hour segment in the traditional system, which corresponds to roughly this time of day. If children received a few coins, they happily went shopping. A common place was the neighborhood gate watch post, where the gatekeeper lived and worked. That gatekeeper didn't only open and close the gate, he sold small everyday items too: sandals, paper for cleaning, and snacks for kids, sometimes even roasted sweet potatoes. For a tiny price, children could buy a treat, and the gate, symbol of nighttime security, became a lively daytime point in the neighborhood. Between 3 and 4, if work ended early or there was a spare moment, many people visited temples and shrines. Edo had countless major sites, and they were not only places of worship, they were also leisure spaces. Stalls lined the entrances, tea houses offered rest, and crowds gathered for special events where sacred images or treasures normally hidden were displayed. These events drew huge numbers of visitors. People prayed, but they also strolled, shopped, ate, and socialized. Temples and shrines functioned like spiritual centers and urban parks at once. Around 5, the husband returned, and one of Edo's strongest habits appeared: the public bath. Many nagaya had no private bath. Fuel was expensive, and fire in the home was always dangerous. In a wooden city, with wind, workshops, oil lamps, and live embers, fire was a daily threat. So bathing was done at neighborhood bathhouses, and in Edo, it was common to go almost every day. The city was dusty, people worked hard, and bathing was both hygiene and relief. A typical bathhouse had zones: a changing area, a washing area, and a very hot tub. A common routine was to enter the hot tub first to warm the body, then step out, receive cleaner hot water, and wash thoroughly. If someone forgot their washing cloth, they could rent one for a few coins. Entrance fees were low enough in many periods that even nagaya residents could go regularly. Many bathhouses also had an upstairs lounge for men, where they chatted, played go or shogi, and exchanged news. The bathhouse was a social node. After bathing, some men stopped at a barbershop. Hairstyles of the era required skilled maintenance, shaving certain parts, keeping the top knot in order. It wasn't easy to do alone, so regular visits were common. The barbershop had a master and assistants. They wet the hair, shaved where needed, untied the top knot, and reset it properly. Like the bathhouse, the barbershop served as a place to talk and connect. To ease waiting, shops sometimes kept small games, boards, or light reading. Around 6 back home, dinner was often modest. Many ate the stored rice, sometimes as ochazuke with tea and pickles. A substantial side dish wasn't guaranteed. Single men depended even more on outside food. Night stalls for soba, buying prepared side dishes, or dropping into an izakaya for a quick drink before sleep. Edo had nightlife, but it was neighborhood-based and limited by light and cost. Here's a key surprise. Even though people often slept early because there was no electricity, Edo still had popular nighttime entertainment. One major example was yose, short for gathering halls. Its origins are tied to performances in temple and shrine precincts, and over time, it became permanent venues offering storytelling, humor, and varied acts. This form of entertainment is often linked to developments beginning in the late 17th century, and by the early 19th century, there were more than 100 yose venues in Edo, so common that some accounts suggest nearly every neighborhood had access to one. Programs included rakugo, ghost stories, sleight of hand, mimicry, acrobatics, and more. There were daytime shows and nighttime shows. For nagaya residents, night sessions were especially appealing. After work, laughter was a way to stay human in a demanding life. Records describe audiences filled with merchants, artisans, day laborers, and other city dwellers. If a performance was especially attractive, families might even go together. Still, most people tried to sleep early. The reason was simple. Light was expensive. Lamps like the andon used oil. Rapeseed oil burned cleaner but cost more. Fish oil was cheaper but dim, smelly, and not long-lasting. If someone needed to write or sew at night, they had to work very close to the lamp. So many homes reduced nighttime activity. Between 9 and 10, they prepared to sleep, and around 10, neighborhood gates closed. Edo quieted. The day ended. That's the full rhythm of a working family in a back alley Nagaya, a city without modern utilities, yet supported by dense commerce, shared facilities, public services, and customs that made it possible to work, study, eat, bathe, socialize, and rest. If we want to understand Edo beyond castles and samurai, we have to step into the alleys, listen at the well, smell the charcoal, and follow the city's invisible clock.